He let it ring at 9:14 on a Thursday evening. Not the first ring, the third. He watched her name light up his screen while the lead investor across the conference table was mid-sentence about growth trajectory, and he pressed decline without breaking eye contact with the man. Thumb to screen, name gone. That's the detail that would come back to him later. Not what happened in the hours after. Not the hospital. Not the silence. Not the particular way Carmen's voice sounded when she finally called him 2 days later. It was that one small, practiced gesture, performed so automatically it no longer required thought. Ingrid Mercer had been trying to reach the man she was building a life with for 43 minutes. She had something she needed him to hear. Not something important in the abstract way. Something real and immediate, happening right now in the fluorescent-lit corridor of Mercy General on the north side of Chicago, where she was standing in her street clothes with her coat half on and her phone pressed against her ear and her 7-year-old son sitting in a plastic chair 6 feet away, holding the stuffed rabbit he hadn't carried in public since he was 4. Milo had the rabbit because Ingrid had grabbed it from his backpack before they left the apartment. She'd grabbed it because she knew, the moment the neighbor called, that this was the kind of night that required the rabbit. And Holden Greer, the man who had built a healthcare analytics company from a laptop and a rented desk to something worth $42 million on paper and rising, looked at her name on his screen and thought, "She knows I'm in the pitch tonight. She'll call back. She always calls back." He pressed decline. He smiled at the investor. He said, "Where were we?" If you've ever been the person whose calls went to voicemail on a night when voicemail wasn't something you could afford, this story is for you. Hit the like button before we go further. Drop your city in the comments, because the stories on this channel travel, and I want to see how far. Subscribe if you're new, because what happens next is the kind of thing you don't want to walk away from halfway through. Now let's go back to where it started to fall apart. Ingrid had been an emergency medicine physician for 9 years. She had delivered a baby in a parking garage during a February blizzard. She had told a father of 3 that his wife wasn't coming home. She had held the hand of a 17-year-old who had made a decision he couldn't take back, and talked to him quietly and without flinching until the crisis team arrived. She did not panic easily. But standing in that hallway at 9:19, listening to Holden's voicemail message, for the second time in 20 minutes, she felt something in her chest she would later identify as the specific, suffocating weight of being alone in a moment too large to carry by yourself. Her mother, Diane, had been watching Milo when it happened. That was the part Ingrid couldn't stop replaying. Her mother had been doing her a favor, as she had done every Thursday evening for 2 years, so Ingrid could have 4 hours of quiet, or a run, or an adult dinner that didn't involve negotiating over the broccoli. Diane had been sitting at the kitchen table helping Milo with his spelling words when her hand stopped moving, and she said very calmly, "Something's wrong, baby. Go get the phone." Milo had gotten the phone. He was 7 years old, and he had done exactly the right thing, and Ingrid would never stop being proud of him for that, and also never fully recover from the fact that he'd had to do it at all. The neighbor had called 911 and then called Ingrid. Ingrid had left her apartment in 11 minutes. She had driven to Mercy General in 14. She found Milo in the emergency waiting room wrapped in a hospital blanket, still holding his grandmother's phone, which the neighbor had told him to bring. He looked up when she walked through the door. He said, "Hi, Mama," just that, in the voice of a child who has been trying very hard to be fine. She sat next to him, put her arm around him, held him for a moment, and then she pulled out her own phone and called Holden. He didn't answer. She texted, "Holden, I need you. My mom is in the ER. Can you come get Milo?" Then, 5 minutes later, when there was nothing, "Please, I need someone to take him." The attending physician found her in the hallway at 10:40. He was careful with the way he arranged his face before he spoke, and she knew what she was looking at before he finished his first sentence. She was a doctor. She knew that face. She had worn it herself. Diane had had a massive hemorrhagic stroke. The bleed was in the brainstem, They had done everything they could. Ingrid sat with that information for a moment, the way you sit with something too large to process standing up. And then she stood up, because Milo was 6 feet away, and he was watching her, and she needed to walk back to that chair and tell him something no one should have to tell a 7-year-old. She called Holden once more before she did it, out of some last remaining belief that he would pick up, that there was still a version of this night where she didn't have to do the next part completely alone. His voicemail, her name on his screen, declined for the 3rd time, while she stood in a Chicago hospital corridor trying to figure out how to explain death to her son. She put the phone in her pocket. She went back to Milo. She told him. And later, at 2:07 in the morning, when the paperwork was signed and the social worker had come and gone, and Milo was asleep across 2 chairs with his head in her lap and his rabbit against his chest, Ingrid stared at the ceiling of that waiting room and thought about a conversation she had been planning to have with Holden for 3 months. She had been waiting for the right moment. She had rehearsed it maybe 40 times. It wasn't complicated, just the truth, stated directly, the way she preferred things. She wanted to ask him to be more present for Milo, not for her. She had made a kind of peace with who Holden was when it came to her. But Milo had started, in the careful, quiet way of children who have learned to want things gently so the disappointment fits better, to count on him. To say H is coming to my game Saturday with the specific, heart-cracking hopefulness of someone who is not yet sure if hope is a safe thing to have. Ingrid had been working up to asking Holden to honor that, to be intentional about it. She had a whole dinner planned. She had also, in a locked compartment of her mind, been carrying something else. Something she'd told no one. In August, she had been offered the directorship of the emergency department at Lakeshore Medical, a position that came with a salary that would have eliminated the quiet financial anxiety that had been her background noise for 4 years. Ever since Milo's father had left, it would have meant real stability, the kind where she stopped doing the invisible arithmetic every month. She had turned it down, because taking it would have shifted her schedule enough to make her Thursday nights harder, and harder meant fewer, and fewer meant Holden's already crowded life would have one more reason not to include her. She had made herself smaller, so there would be room for him, and she had never told him she'd done it. Holden's pitch closed at 10:15 p.m. The lead investor signed the term sheet on the spot, which almost never happened. His COO, a precise and undemonstrative man named Arthur, allowed himself to say we did it with the quiet intensity of someone who had been holding that sentence for months. Holden felt the clean, specific satisfaction of a thing built and validated. He checked his phone at 10:48, standing in the middle of the celebration, and saw 3 missed calls from Ingrid, 2 texts, a voicemail he did not listen to. He read the texts. He told himself that if it had been a real emergency, she would have called the hospital directly. She was a doctor. She knew how emergencies worked. He texted back, "Sorry, just wrapped. Big news, so proud of this team. Call you from the car." He didn't call from the car. The call with his co-founder ran until midnight. After that, he was too wired to have a real conversation. He thought, "She's probably asleep. I'll call in the morning." He fell asleep at 1:30 a.m., still in his dress shirt, with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a man who had not yet understood that he had spent the evening celebrating while the woman he loved sat in a hospital waiting room telling her 7-year-old son that grandma wasn't coming home. She didn't call him the next day, or the day after. He called her 3 times Friday, twice Saturday. She answered on the second Saturday call, her voice even and uninflected in a way that was not like her. She told him what had happened, what time, which calls he had missed. She told it chronologically, without decoration, the way she told things. He said, "Ingrid, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," she said. "That's the part I keep sitting with." She didn't raise her voice. She said she needed time and would call when she was ready, and then she said goodbye and hung up. He stood in his kitchen with his phone in his hand. Then he called Carmen. Carmen Reyes had been Ingrid's best friend since their first year of medical school. She had two opinions about Holden that she had shared with him directly. She had kept a third one, for Ingrid's sake, in the locked drawer where good friends keep the things they know but cannot say. She answered on the first ring. He could tell she'd been expecting the call, that she had been sitting with everything she knew for 48 hours, deciding how much of it to give him. "When did you last actually show up?" she said, before he could answer. Not to something she organized, not to something that required her to build her schedule around yours. When did you last just be there? He didn't have a clean answer. She turned down the Lakeshore directorship, Carmen said. He didn't know what that was. He said so. Department director, emergency medicine, the kind of position that comes around once. A pause. She turned it down in August. She didn't tell me she was offered it. No, Carmen said. She didn't. I'd think about why. He stood very still. She's been making herself smaller to fit into the margins of your schedule for 2 years, Carmen said. Not anger. Something too tired to be anger. And you didn't notice because the margins were always full. She made sure of that. She's very good at making sure of that. He said, "What can I do?" Carmen was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. I'm telling you because I think you need to hear it, and because she'd rather I didn't, which probably means it's the most important part." She told him about Milo, about the conversation Ingrid had been trying to have with him for 3 months, about the fact that her son, this 7-year-old with a second-hand baseball glove and a stuffed rabbit and a careful, heartbreaking habit of not wanting things too loudly, had started to count on Holden. Not on his promises, on the smaller things. The way Holden always brought him a hot chocolate on weekends, even when he forgot everything else. The one soccer game Holden had attended, one, in 2 years, that Milo had told his entire class about the following Monday. With a specificity and a pride his teacher had mentioned to Ingrid in passing, warmly, the way teachers mention things they think parents should know. Ingrid had not told Holden. Because she didn't know how to say, "My son is counting something he should not have to count." Holden sat down. "She was going to ask you," Carmen said, "to be more intentional about him." She had it planned. A whole dinner. She never got to it because there was never a good night. Something was always more important. He didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you this so you feel worse," Carmen said. "I'm telling you because she won't. And you need to know what you're actually dealing with. This isn't about one missed call. You know that." "I know that," he said. Carmen hung up. Holden sat at his kitchen table for a long time, not problem-solving, just sitting with the specific, unmanageable shape of understanding that the distance between who he had been and who she needed him to be was not dramatic or sudden. It was ordinary. It was built one declined call at a time, one rescheduled dinner at a time, one night of champagne, while she sat alone in a waiting room and held it together for her son. He had been so sure she was fine. She was always fine. She was the most capable person he'd ever known, and somewhere along the way, he had let capable become a reason not to check. He went to her apartment 3 days after Carmen's call. No announcement, no flowers, nothing orchestrated. He had thought about all of those things and rejected them one by one. She opened the door in her scrubs, just off a shift. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you're too tired to arrange your face into anything but exactly what you feel. She let him in. Milo was at a neighbor's. The apartment was quiet. She sat on the couch. He sat in the chair across from it. "Carmen told me," he said. "The Lakeshore offer, the conversation you were trying to have about Milo. The call's Thursday night." He paused. "I need you to know that I understand what those things mean, not individually. Together." She watched him steadily. "I didn't pick up because I told myself you'd understand," he said. "Because you always understand. Because in 2 years I built my entire life around you being the person who would be fine, and I never stopped to ask whether fine was actually true or whether you were just too capable to let me see anything else." She said, "I shouldn't have let you not see it." "You shouldn't have had to manage that," he said. She looked at the window. My mother died in that hospital, she said quietly, and Milo was in the waiting room with a stuffed rabbit. He hadn't needed it in 3 years, but he needed it that night, and I had to tell him alone at 11 o'clock while you were celebrating. She said it the way you say a thing that has sat inside you long enough that it no longer needs emphasis to land. That's going to take me a long time to get past. I know, he said. I don't know what I want yet, she said. I'm not going to pretend I do. I'm trying to get Milo through the next few months, keep my job, not fall apart. I don't have space right now to figure out what to do with us. I'm not asking you to figure it out, he said. I'm asking if I can show up, not in a big way. Just, if Milo has a game, I want to be there. If you need someone to sit with him so you can sleep, I want to do that. I want to do the actual thing instead of the version of the thing that fits my schedule. She looked at him for a long moment. You've said versions of that before, she said. Not in those words. But you've said you'd be more present and then something would come up. I know. So, what's different? He thought about it honestly. Not the answer that would work, the true one. I think I understood it as something I should do, he said. I didn't understand it as something I was already failing at. There's a difference and I couldn't see it until now. He paused, and I didn't understand that Milo was counting on me. Carmen told me. And that? He stopped. Started again. That matters to me in a way I don't have a clean word for. He's a kid. He didn't sign up for any of this. I've been careless with something I had no right to be careless with. Ingrid said nothing for a moment. She pressed her lips together and looked at the window and didn't blink, which was what she did when she was deciding whether to let herself feel something. Then she said, he asks about you. Just that, 3 words. The weight in them was everything. What does he ask? Holden said. Whether you're coming over, simply. Whether you'll be at his next game. Whether you actually like soccer or if you were just being polite. A small, involuntary sound that was almost a laugh but wasn't quite. He's trying to figure out if you're real. I want to be real, Holden said. She looked at him, not softly, not closed. The look of a woman who had made herself very good at surviving things alone, who was deciding, carefully, with full knowledge of the risk, whether to let something in. Then be real, she said, not in speeches, consistently, without me having to arrange it. Okay, he said. She nodded, not like an agreement, like she'd filed the answer and would be watching to see what it became. He came to the next game. And the one after that. He brought the hot chocolate without being asked, and when Milo scored his first goal of the season, not a clean goal, honestly more of a chaos goal, the ball deflecting off his shin at an improbable angle, Holden was the loudest person on the sideline, not performing loudness. Actually loud, the involuntary kind. Milo looked up from the field and found him immediately, the way kids find the person they were hoping would be watching. It was a Saturday in early October, cold enough for real coats, that thin, bright, Midwestern cold that turned everyone's cheeks red. Ingrid stood next to Holden on the sideline and said nothing, but at some point during the second half, her shoulder was against his, and she didn't move away. He noticed. He said nothing about it. He had learned, in the weeks since September, that the most important thing was not converting every good moment into a conversation about whether they were going to be okay. She would tell him when she was ready. In the meantime, the only thing that mattered was showing up as advertised. He answered every call. Not as a rule, he didn't make it a rule, because rules implied effort, and he was trying to make it a reflex. She called once at 7:30 a.m. during a board prep session, and he stepped into the hallway and took it, and it was nothing urgent. She'd found his jacket in her car and was asking if he needed it, and he talked to her for 4 minutes about nothing and went back into the meeting. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. She called the next week to tell him something that happened at work that made her laugh. The week after, to ask about a contract she was reviewing. Small things. The ordinary things that constitute a life when someone is willing to be present for them. One evening in November, he was at her apartment for dinner when Milo fell asleep on the couch, in the middle of a movie he'd been insisting he was absolutely not tired for. Ingrid got up to carry him to bed, and Holden said, "I've got him." She stepped back. He carried Milo down the hallway, this small sleeping person with the rabbit tucked under his arm, and got him into bed without waking him, which required the specific careful effort of someone trying hard and knowing it. He came back to the kitchen. Ingrid was at the sink. He said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "The lakeshore position. If it came open again, would you take it?" He paused. "I want the real answer, not the one that factors me in." She turned around. "I don't know," she said. "Honestly, it was a big decision and I made it for complicated reasons." She turned back to the sink. "But if the choice came again, I'd want to make it differently, more honestly. Meaning not around me. Meaning around what's actually true." She paused. "Which might still include you, but it can't be the only reason." "I know," he said. "I want to be in the actual math, not the reason you're doing the math wrong." She looked at him over her shoulder. Something in her expression shifted the way things shift when you hear exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment and don't quite know how to hold it. She turned back to the sink. "Help me dry," she said. He picked up the dish towel. They stood at the sink together in the ordinary light of a Tuesday kitchen in November, doing a quiet thing, and it was not a dramatic moment. It was the opposite of dramatic. He had spent 2 years treating these moments as interruptions. He was only now beginning to understand they were the whole point. Milo asked him about the soccer thing in December. Out of nowhere, they were in the car on the way to get pizza, and Milo in the back seat with his coat still on and his cleats leaving dirt on the upholstery, said, "H, do you actually like soccer? Or were you just being nice?" Holden looked at him in the rearview mirror. "I actually like it," he said. "I didn't used to. But watching you play makes it more interesting." Milo considered this with the full seriousness of someone conducting a real evaluation. "Okay," he said. "You can come to the indoor season too if you want. It's kind of loud inside, though." "I'll manage," Holden said. Ingrid was looking out the passenger window. He couldn't see her face, but he could see the slight adjustment in the set of her shoulders, the specific way a person's body shifts when something moves into a new position. She reached over and turned up the heat without saying anything, because Milo always ran cold in December and always refused to say so. Holden watched the road. He thought about a phone screen lit with her name on a Thursday night, a thumb moving across it, name gone. He thought about a woman sitting in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning holding her son, calling a number that rang and rang. He thought about all the ordinary evenings he had classified as interruptions. He's in all the dinners he had been too busy to reschedule, all the games he had missed for reasons he could no longer remember. He was not going to fix those things with a good month, a good season, a year of showing up correctly. He understood that. He had no illusions about it. But he was going to keep showing up anyway, not because he expected an outcome, because the only honest response to understanding what you broke was to become the kind of person who wouldn't break it again, whether or not anyone was watching, whether or not anything was ever fully repaired. That was the work, unglamorous, uncelebrated, continuous. He was, at 43 years old, finally ready to do it. The car was warm. Milo was describing a complicated soccer play he had invented and intended to attempt at indoor league, regardless of whether it was technically legal. Ingrid had turned in her seat to listen to him, and she was genuinely listening, her whole body oriented toward her son, the way it always was when he talked, with that focused, unhurried attention that Holden had spent 2 years failing to notice was the most remarkable thing about her. He kept his eyes on the road. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, something from the office, something that could wait, that objectively could wait. He felt it. He did not reach for it. He drove, and the city moved past the windows, enormous and lit and indifferent the way cities always are, and somewhere in the back seat a 7-year-old with dirt on his cleats was explaining why his soccer play was technically brilliant and would definitely work. And Holden listened. Not because he was trying to, because he was finally, genuinely there. It turned out that was enough. It was, in the most precise sense, exactly enough.